Hi everyone. Not him again. Boo. Listen, Natalie's kind of done my job for me, but I was going to do the old icebreaker by saying, asking you to introduce yourself, Kate, and say a little bit about you and your firm and what you specialise in and that kind of stuff, just before we get into the facts and figures.
Okay, well, I'm based in Cardiff. Tiny little firm, just me, a power planner and admin. It's mainly lifestyle financial planning. I'm a pension transfer specialist as well, so it's a bit of a niche, but that's us. We're at the touchy-feely end of the advising game, I would say.
So on my scale, right, so you
I'm right, a 10.
You're a 10?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So that's interesting to know. So as, keeping it real, there we go. So as Natalie introduced, one of the funniest parts of this morning was when Guy, bless him, it was a great session, and thanks to Tom for leading that session, but said he was saddened and disappointed by Mark's triangle for not having the consumer. And rest assured, knowing what we know about the Landcat, that will be repeated at least 17,000 times over the next week. But no, of course the consumer underpins all of this. And the reason why we care so much about getting this dialogue flowing and getting the sector operating correctly is because it's real people at the end of the day whose lives and livelihoods and families that we're affecting. So courtesy of Schroders, who helped us out by sponsoring today's event, they also helped us with the research element of today. I know they absolutely played it with a straight bat. This is our research. They've had no sphere of influence at all. So the questions I take you through, there's not like a secret question 11, which is, what do you think about the Schroders multi-asset fund? That doesn't exist. I can assure you it doesn't exist. But what we did do is on the 24th or 25th of January, so this is proper fresh, off the shelf. YouGov surveyed 1,900 real people, as opposed to whatever we are. And the respondents were tested on a number of themes, including perception of the sector, trust, knowledge, how exposed they are to various forms of advertising across the different kind of facets of financial services. So we thought it'd be a great idea, even though this is consumer research, was to get a financial planner who we know and love very well. Oh.
Not unsubtle at all.
Okay, Steve, can you switch your mic to the other side so streamers can hear you?
Thank you for giving away the magic of it.
It's like going to see Darren Brown. Very polished. I've broken it now.
Well done.
Kate, help me, say something. Can streamers hear me now? Pause. So yeah, we had the great idea to speak to a financial planner who we know and love, and Kate and I, although this is the first day we've actually met, is that right?
Yeah.
In real life.
We might not love each other anymore after this.
Well, we'll see how the next half hour or so goes. So we thought we'd get someone who's like at the coalface of delivering advice and helping people change their lives for the better, to see whether both what we've spoken about this morning, actually, because I think we'll circle back and talk about some of that stuff as well through this, but also what you feel about this research. Does it resonate with the people that you speak to, and is there other stuff that we can glean from that? So we've got 5 themes. There's going to be time for questions at the end, so long as I don't prattle on for too long. And then if you're streaming, if you can hear me, who knows if you can hear me, you're free to deliver questions in the mechanism that you're able to. So, theme number 1, desire for knowledge. Now, what do we mean by that? So I'm about to put up a chart where it would be easy to interpret it one way, but I'm going to be really clear about what this question is. What this question is, it's not getting people to define the current level of knowledge that they have. It is getting them to define the level of knowledge that they feel that they should have. So you can see there across the left-hand side, pensions, UK tax regime, regulator, ombudsman help, investment products. When we say financial institutions income, that's how the flow of money works behind the scenes and who benefits and who profits. And then interpreting investment performance. So you can see there's not a huge amount of disparity across the different bandings, but you can see that pensions and the UK tax regime top the charts for things that things that consumers feel like they should have at least a good working knowledge of. And I guess, first question for Kate, how does that resonate with how people present themselves, the kind of things they talk about? Or is this just so far removed from your day-to-day life?
Yes and no. I mean, the thing about any kind of consumer stuff like this is it's a set of fixed questions at a fixed moment in time in their lives. So it's a snapshot, it's not a whole picture. I think in terms of the way the results have come out, that would make sense because pensions and tax are probably the two most personal things out of those 5 to the people that I talk to day to day. I'm not sure I've ever had a client ask me about how the regulator and ombudsman works, to be honest. But it was a question, so if people feel like they want to know more, then great.
Is that something so talk me through a little bit then of the kind of, we would call it the onboarding journey, but meeting a new client, they've either been referred to you or whatever, they've come through the door to your firm. How does that journey work? How do you kick off talking about the nuts and bolts and gubbins behind the scenes? Or do you?
I don't actually kick off with that at all. I mean, a client will always come to me because they've got a reason to. There's a thing that they want to talk to me about or things that they want to talk to me about. You don't get many people beating the door down and saying, please give me some financial coaching. But I kick off by talking about them, their story, what they're here for. This stuff comes much later on in the process. That would be second, third meeting. It's planning first. And then this comes under the product side of things if there's a need to discuss, and almost always there is. There are products underpinning the planning. But
so when you come to that, sorry to cut across you, Kate, but when you come to that moment of deploying the product, whether that's a platform or whether it's a pension or an ISA or whatever, and you're into kind of service mode with the manufacturing side of the sector, and you're into terms and conditions and ex post ante and all that kind of guff that we probably neither of us really want to talk about in the grand scheme of things. How is there a kind of veneer that exists where you and the client are a team and that just happens elsewhere? Or how does that manifest itself?
Of course they have to understand what it is that we're recommending and why, all of those things, of course they do. And it's very important that they kind of have agency of that. It's part of the relationship. But the real nitty-gritty nuts and bolts, most clients are just not interested in. So some of that feels very disconnected from the day-to-day conversations that I would have. I'm not saying they're not important at all, because it is important that people understand how it all works. But I really believe that for most of the clients that I work with, there are much bigger questions and bigger concerns for them to look at rather than sort of the precise way that the money moves around the industry, for example.
And is there any kind of disparity in, first question, in terms of the typical age of your client? Is there a spread, or is it a particular sweet spot of age, and is there a disparity there?
Well, when I was doing my prod last year...
Mike started. Where's Mike? He suddenly started listening.
The biggest age group is 55 to 70.
Right.
I'm sure I'm not unusual in that. Youngest is about 40, apart from my son, obviously.
Right.
Yes.
Because one thing that surprised me, certainly, and maybe that's just because I'm naive or whatever, but there's a very limited set of data that we can present to you that's palatable, and behind the scenes there's this ridiculous level of segmentation and demographic stuff. And we had a really funny moment 2 days ago where I'm going through this data, and Mark, sorry, excuse me for saying this, Mark, but Mark's in last minute planning mode for the event, and I keep turning around with my notepad to say, hey, look at this obscure data point, isn't that interesting? And he looks at me as if to say, Steve, please just leave me alone. But so you can find out in the data set, you can find out what someone who logged into Instagram in East Anglia in the last month thinks about pensions compared to investment products. But that's a very roundabout way of introducing the fact that to some of the stuff that Guy was talking about before lunch, around the level of knowledge that people present themselves with. It's really interesting when you look at the age bandings of the data, and the lowest age banding in the YouGov data is 16 to 24. There's something like 50% of that age group, and it is statistically significant in the sample size. At least 50% of youngsters say that they self-identify as wanting to have, or believe that they should have, either a precise, like it's heavily skewed toward good working knowledge. But that's to me, that's kind of hopeful.
Yeah.
That maybe the initial throes of compulsion and auto-enrollment is starting to penetrate the psyche of people. Does that resonate with you out in the real world, or is that maybe in...
I don't really have clients of that age, but anecdotally, my son's 21, and he's gone to university now, but he had worked previously, he worked for me for a few years, and he's very switched on about all this stuff, whether that's because he's got a mother who's a financial planner, whether he's more engaged with stuff that we weren't at that age. But he said to me, Mum, we need to get a pension started for me. He's still paying into it now. How long that will last when his student loan ran out rather more quickly than he was expecting it to last term, I don't know. But he was very switched on, and he's a lot more switched on about a lot of other things as well. So I do wonder perhaps if some of it's sort of, the Instagram generation, isn't it? But I think it's a good thing. It's a really good thing. They're politically much more switched on, financially much more so. And I'm making a generalisation there, I'm sure, but only based on my own experience.
Cool, thank you. Last bit on this desire for knowledge, and it's time to throw a hand grenade on the data. Where, if we split this data by gender, and so what you're seeing there in the bars is the net percentage of people who don't desire knowledge of the following. You can see that other than the regulator and ombudsman help, where it's kind of clustered, across pensions, UK tax, the way income flows, investment products, and interpreting investment products, there is almost a 2-to-1 gender split, where women are twice as likely to not desire knowledge of the following. And I guess my question to you is there does that resonate with you and your clients? What is your gender split in terms of the clients that you advise, and are they, without being hopelessly reductive and potentially the pair of us get cancelled in the next hour, do they present different problems? Does that ring true to you?
Yes, to an extent. I mean, my question looking at that was, if this is what women don't want to know about, what do they want to know about? The unasked questions. I think there's another pattern here that kind of reflects what we've touched on before, which is the further away from the personal you move, the more, certainly on the female side of things, women are saying they don't want to know. They don't want to know about interpreting investment products. They do want to know more about pensions and tax, which is a day-to-day kind of, this is personally affecting me. My client split is that I've probably got more men than women, but it's quite evenly split because I've got quite a lot of client couples. And because we're so planning focused, I think these questions are quite transactional, and they're not things that we would sort of talk about generally, so I wouldn't notice a massive difference, but we talk about so much more than just that. It's kind of hard to say whether it's very indicative or not. That's not helpful at all, is it?
No,
I'm sorry.
It is, because I don't think there's an easy answer to this.
No.
So I guess my follow-up question is, if financial planning to you is going back to how you defined yourself on the traditionalist versus behaviouralist in coaching, if your planning is rooted in psychology then, to a certain degree, does that then not increase the propensity for disparities like this?
Yes, I would say it almost certainly does, yeah. Because if you don't approach something from a transactional start, it doesn't continue in that way either.
Because I'm thinking of the and this is just coincidental that Schroeder sponsored this research, right? But about a month ago or so, there was a headline. I don't know if it was a headline or if it just appeared on Twitter that X% of planners don't have a strategy for women. Right? And that was like a red rag to a bull, that headline, right? Yeah. But then, does my point around psychology and does my point around, or do some of these conclusions not hint at the fact that, well, maybe they should? Or am I just being, ignorant and happy to be corrected on all of this?
I think really our strategy for advising everybody should be strategy for advising the person that's in front of you, because every single one of them is different. And that includes when you've got a couple. Just because you've got a couple, yes, you look at them as a couple, but they each have their own needs and concerns. And, in today where there are so many blended families, for example, my own, I've got a child from a previous marriage. I've made provision for him that isn't anything to do with my current husband. So, even just fairly common situations like that, it isn't about gender, it's just about the person. So I would disagree that we need a different strategy.
Grand. Listen, and if you have any follow-up questions, just to reiterate, then Natalie will round them up at the end. Getting on to subject number 2, so trust issues. Does the sector have trust issues? So
no.
we presented...
None at all.
It doesn't.
Ridiculous.
No, it's fine. Next slide.
We're disappointed and what was it?
Saddened and disappointed in... Shocked. Was it shocked, saddened and disappointed? As we all are with Mark on a daily basis. I don't know about you, but I'm having great fun with that statement, so here we are. So we presented respondents with a number of statements relating to trust in the sector. So from left to right, so it's kind of hard to read up the back. So I have trust in the integrity of the sector. That's kind of mixed.
They hate us, don't they?
Well, it's kind of mixed. The sector runs for its benefit, not mine. Well, 7 out of 10 people agree with that. The sector is better run than it was 10 years ago. So if you think of the wholesale changes that have happened, one might be a little bit disappointed with that. Financial services providers price their products and services fairly. Again, pretty underwhelming split there. And I feel connected and engaged to the sector. Probably for all of us, the most disappointing of all. So, right, let's bring this back to UK. So, how many clients do you advise on a regular basis?
65 clients or client couples.
And do you have? So, is that the ceiling? Do you think that you could reasonably?
Almost, because of my own lifestyle as well, but almost, yeah. Plus or minus 10, I would say, is about right.
So. All the stuff I was saying earlier, right, around inefficiencies in the sector and technology and all that kind of stuff. I promise you this is going to be relevant in a second. If we could unlock some of that glue in the sector, does that unlock another 10, 15, 20% capacity? Because a lot of this has read across the advice gap stuff, right, where you've got a distribution curve of people. And there's a certain percentage at the very top end who have the ability and the capability and the money to be advised.
Yeah, for sure.
Is this just an outcome of that there's only a certain percentage?
We were talking about this last week, weren't we? You know what I'm going to say.
Go on then.
No, I think this is much more than an industry, if you want to call it that, issue. I think the advice gap within our industry is very much a reflection of the widening gap across the whole of society now between rich and poor and various other things. And what the answer to that is, I don't know, but I don't think it's limited to the financial services sector at all. I think it's just a reflection of what's going on more broadly.
So do you think underlying this is to what degree of influence and impact is the wealth disparity and people not being connected? Because this is, again, what we've got to remember about the YouGov research, and it's kind of, I choose my words carefully here, right? It's kind of a little bit sad for me, because what we do with the research is that we screen for certain income levels.
Okay.
and we screen for certain savings levels so that the research is relevant to the audience and it's relevant to the financial services sector. But there is that element of me, I'm pushing a button and I'm cutting off a certain part of society. Now, that's easy for me to do in my cosy lifestyle now, but as you know, as we've talked about on Home Games, came from a very ordinary background. So like 15-year-old Steve looks at that and goes a bit, are we doing enough? You know, are there wider things at play here?
For sure, and the other side of this is that, you know, I look at this through an advisor's eyes, whereas I'm pretty sure that the perception generally of the sector is way more than just advisors. It's banks, it's building societies, it's, you know, everything all lumped in together. And we're all just one small part of that. But overall, you know, there are definite issues, for sure.
Grand. Well, not grand. It's rubbish. Just a linking word to go to the next slide. But yeah, it's not a great reflection. And I guess the challenge and what I think the panel will get into in the next session, and maybe Dave will touch on this in the Q&A, is like what is our individual sphere of influence? You know, what is it that we can use to be agents of change or to affect change? Whether if you're a provider, is this about communication? Do you need to communicate better? If it's about regulation, do you need to regulate better? And I'm not sure looking at that when you see 7 out of 10 people saying, well, actually the sector runs for its benefit and not mine. I don't see the path forward for that to change.
The sad thing is I can sort of understand why they say that as well, because the way it's portrayed in the media, you know, because of the way that I work with my own clients, it doesn't actually matter if they've only got 10 grand in an ISA. But they still have to have the money to pay me for the planning. So there's still a starting level. It's not so much about how much money they've got to invest, but which has more traditionally been part of where there's been the advice gap. But they've still got to be able to pay me for the work that I do for them. So that doesn't really take that away. It just shifts the emphasis onto something else.
All right. Let's look at topic number 3, so where to get advice. So we asked people, and advice in inverted commas there is a loaded word in this room, because advice to the real man and woman in the street is going to mean a different thing to the kind of advice that we refer to. So we asked, if you have a financial problem, where are you likely to seek some form of guidance or advice? Where are you first likely to seek that, and where would you consider seeking that? And you can see the kind of red, amber, green. So the green is, yes, I would definitely go for advice here. The amber is I may or may not, and red is definitely would not. You can see in the third cluster there, colleagues. I assure you that all the Lancats didn't answer that. Definitely wouldn't go to my colleagues. It's a big surprise with that conclusion. But you can see here, I guess, maybe not very surprising, family member was the number one. My question for you in relation to that is, does that resonate with where you would get your referrals from? How do you generate your...
I'm very lucky, partly because I've been doing this for a long time, but all of my new clients come from referral. But this, to me, is absolutely fundamentally about trust. Most of us trust our family and friends, especially friends, because they're choice. So that it makes complete sense. It doesn't really matter that those family and friends might not have technical knowledge, because most of the time we want validation, not technical. Help. I think it was Helena put a very interesting article up, I think it was on LinkedIn last week, about the words around advice and all of that, and help was very much one of them, and I found that very interesting, and that would make complete sense that they would go to somebody that they feel that they can trust, rather than...
Yeah, that makes sense. And the one concerning one for me is that if you look at the underlying data, people are just as likely to go to the internet.
Sure.
Like almost irrespective of age. And not only a blind search, whacking in any old nonsense on Google, but a known internet content provider on the internet. if you were to like remove yourself from your firm, and I totally appreciate that your number one prerogative is to run a healthy, successful business. That's what you need to do. But does that, in the context of closing the advice gap and the growth of the sector, and some of the stuff Mark mentioned earlier around, if the sector starts to return to its mean, return to the old days of large organisations, so it's these people on the end here who are going to get soaked up by some of those large distributors.
For sure.
So does that concern you, as knowing what you know about the quality of advice that you're able to provide? Does that worry you at all?
No, it doesn't, because I think the more research that people do and the more they try and equip themselves with information, the better. It's a good thing. People are either going to come to an advisor or they're not, and I don't think the increasing amount of information that's available on the internet is really going to significantly change that. It's not something that I've really noticed. It very occasionally with a new client or younger clients, they will ask about stuff, but I see that as a good thing because you can engage in a proper conversation about it then.
What if, to counter that then, what if, because of the way that, again, some of the stuff that Tom and Guy touched on around social media and how algorithmically driven that is behind the scenes, what if our definition on the right-hand side is, so there's a whole world of great people on the internet giving advice and money experts, and we don't need to name them, but there's a huge raft of really, really good people saying very sensible things. But what about the kind of potential vulnerability of, either your behaviour or your search history or whatever, leading you towards some of the stuff that makes the headlines, some of the stuff on TikTok, some of the stuff on YouTube, sponsored adverts. I'm thinking along the lines of, then there was a stuff I've not, with the day that's in it today, I've not had time to process this properly, but there was I gather that there's been action taken against Free Trade to get it to remove some of its influencer content because it's deemed to be a risk to vulnerable people. Like, does that even reach you in your day-to-day life, or is it something that concerns you?
It doesn't, but it does concern me. They're two separate things. There are a huge number of vulnerable people out there. We've all got confirmation bias, so even the words that we use when we put in a Google search are going to be biased as we're putting them in, because we're looking for. It's not often we're looking for objective. We're looking for a validation of what we perhaps already think. And I know that's a very sweeping statement, but I think a lot of that goes on. It does concern me for sure because there's so little policing of what's out there. But in terms of my day-to-day dealings with my own clients, no, it doesn't really have an impact. But that's the disconnect again that's always there.
So is that ever raised by any of your clients around some of the new, and we've got a section coming up on new generation investments, as we call them, but is that ever proactively raised at all?
No, never. I don't know whether my lot are a bit rarefied or whether they're completely normal. I don't know.
Is that a Welsh thing?
Yeah, maybe it's a Welsh thing. I mean, I have got some Scottish as well,
This is the Celtic session.
This is the Celtic session.
After all.
Aye.
Look, seamless. So
It's almost like you practiced it.
So we asked this question on advertising exposure. Yeah, I know. We asked this question on advertising exposure. So, to what extent, I can't remember the exact question actually, but in the last few months, have you been exposed to advertising? Because, again, everything we know about algorithmically driven social media, it was curious to me whether, is it just the case that I'm logging onto YouTube and seeing like CFD trading from ex-Premiership footballers because of me and because I'm on a WhatsApp group with Mike and I talk about football and I work in financial services? Is that just content that's being pushed to me, or are real? Someone said yes. Yeah.
Serves you right for being on a WhatsApp group with Mike.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
I can't go there. So to what extent is this impacting the general public? So again, we can see there that there's a decent amount of exposure to cryptocurrency. There's a really interesting gender disparity in trading platforms. Now, when we say trading platforms, we don't mean Hargreaves and Share Centre and things like that. We're specifically talking about kind of modern new generation, kind of CFD type stuff like eToro and things like that, where it's difficult to draw the line between, I don't know, almost gambling in some instances, where you have, as I said, logging onto YouTube and seeing, what is Joe Cole, who used to play up front for West Ham, what could he possibly have gained in those 20 years in terms of knowledge about how CFDs are traded? And then you see the small print at the bottom that says, 87.8% of people have lost money copying this. And the thing, that's true though, like I'm not exaggerating, it is to that extent, and I just worry about that gender split, and is there this kind of intrinsic link between gambling and some of the terminology and behaviours and phraseology around that kind of bleeding through to this? I guess, that's not going to touch your life, Kate, but do you have any views on any of this kind of stuff?
I think crypto is probably the hottest potato, and I think that whatever our views are on it, we need to know something about it, because clients have all been exposed to that, and it's not actually a conversation I've had with any of mine yet. Doesn't mean that won't happen. I've got a couple of clients who have what they call gambling money that we've agreed that they sort of play their own kind of stuff on platforms and do their thing, but none of them are doing crypto yet. But it's going to come. Whatever our views are on it, it's going to happen. And I see on I use Facebook very much for personal stuff and for being me.
You can be you now.
I had to think then a bit about what I was going to say. And there's a sort of a group of people that I know who are out. They're not advisors, but they're really into their crypto and all of that. And I watch sometimes the conversations, and I just think, oh my God. But it's out there. It's happening. Just
an interesting experiment. 2 months ago or so, thinking about the concept of taking on debt and how it's very, 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 very easy to go through a credit check, and within 5 or 10 minutes you have 10, 15, 12, up to 25 grand of personal loan debt.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, the safest, most boring side of the sector that we all deal with, really, because we want people to invest in safe, secure assets that are invested for the long term, that you don't touch, which is like the least sexiest thing imaginable, but it's true. That can often be the hardest thing to do. For it's hard to find an advisor because of the advice gap. It's hard to have enough money to have an advisor. If you're self-directing, it's kind of hard to educate yourself to do that. And then in the kind of crypto world, you have this kind of alluring terminology. You have celebrities who have made a fortune. There was someone on the BBC the other day which just sounded like garbage. It just sounded like it wasn't true.
Surely not.
And as an experiment, 2 months ago, it's only a tenner, so calm down, Steve. I put a tenner on Coinbase, and it's worth £2.80 or something. It's worth now. Mark, how's yours doing?
I've successfully turned 150 quid into 97.
Winning. We are winning with Catcoin. But yeah, it's just something that worries me, and I don't know if it's just, so you can see there.
Yes.
Does crypto and free trading, that kind of concept interest you? And you can see it's a exact crossover as you move up the age bandings. And then interestingly, the kind of grey dots are the mean trust scores towards that sector, and you can see the kind of nervousness around that part of the world reducing over time as you move up the age gap. Up the age bracket, sorry. But even 35 to 44-year-olds, so my age bracket, there's still 3 in 10 saying quite excited by this. It's quite interesting, even though to me it sounds like the absolute last thing. I am in that age group. Yeah, that's a strange thing to ask.
Well, I thought I'd better get a question in because you're doing all the questions.
40. Yeah, whatever.
Would you like me to go now?
Yeah, we're time to wrap up, Natalie. I think we're moving on to, all joking aside, we're moving on to the remaining sections. So, big question, is the sector run any better than it was 10 years ago? And we asked across the age band. I mean, bless the 18-year-olds
I know,
who
that's
gave us a
brilliant.
view that,
The 8 to 14-year-olds 10 years ago with a working knowledge about the
you know,
sector as well. It's
little
awesome.
Johnny when he's 8 years old thinking, do you know what, I really think that it was, for me it was PS13-1 when I was in primary 6, when I really started to appreciate super clean share class. No. So I'm very proud of this research, but that bar is obvious shit. So ignore that. But the rest of it, there's just not. It's very underwhelming. It's very underwhelming. So when you think of the seismic change that the sector's gone through, are we surprised by that? Or, the more I think about it, is it ever going to be within the consumer's power to make an informed judgment like that? Do we in fact want the opposite, where we want those don't know bars to be as big as possible, because it just works behind the scenes? And I've devolved my responsibility to an advisor. I don't know. I mean, so different question, Kate. Is the sector better now than it was A, 10 years ago, and B, when you started in financial services?
Oh my God, when I started in financial services, let's not even go down that road. Handwritten suitability reports, and if you could barely call them that. 10 years ago, I mean, there's always going to be stuff, isn't there? There's always going to be some fuckery like British Steel. There you go, I said it.
First fuck.
And it was always going to be me.
Paulson was 4-6 at Ladbrokes for first fuck. But
go and get your winnings.
Kate's come in as
Buy me a
second
whiskey.
favourite. It's the Welsh second favourites come in.
Yes, it's better than 10 years ago. There's always going to be something. There's always going to be some bugger in the industry going, right, how can I game this for me? But the very large majority of us are just nice, vanilla advisors trying to do the best we possibly can for decent human beings. You know, that's really what it's all about. And yes, it's better. Some bits of it are always going to drive us mad. And where there are human beings, there'll always be human beings trying to, mess with the system. But mainly, it's better. I'm with the 18 to 24-year-olds.
That's good. That's lovely. What a lovely point to end on, or end this section anyway. Because I would like to invite Miss Natalie Holt on stage to see if we've had any questions.
Only the nice questions, please, Nat.
And can the streamers hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
That's good.
Thank you for doing that so seamlessly. Right, so our first question, I'll take it from those of you watching at home. How weird is that? Right, so Jenny asks, do you think this is just down to a lack of financial education and knowledge that leads to these results? So I think when that question came in, that was talking around the desire of knowledge kind of piece and that sort of gender discrepancy there. So people don't necessarily understand how it works. They'd rather reach a specific goal. You can't have trust in something you don't fully understand. And I think some of that point was what you were touching on, Kate, is that, the more personal it is, the better. So what would you say to Jenny?
I would say, yeah, definitely. I talked about my own son, anecdotally, who's young, but he has grown up in a house with a financial planner for a mother and also in a family where no subject is untalked about. So it's all kind of a free-for-all.
Financially or generally?
Anything. But we talk about money, we talk about absolutely everything. So he's grown up in an environment where he can find out things that it's okay to ask. He's got some knowledge in the house. He's quite engaged himself to find out. How typical that is, I honestly don't know, because I only know him and his kid, his friends and all of that, and they seem quite similar, but I think absolutely, yes, that is the case. There isn't enough financial education. It's something that we all talk about a lot.
Do you think there's a peak age or like a sweet spot where it's the right time? Because I remember being interviewed for something and I was in a bad mood and I said, why don't you just let kids be kids? Kids shouldn't be thinking about mortgages and debt and things like that. But, I concede that there's financial education has to play a part. But is there like a sweet spot where we can really get people at the right age to go, this is when you should start thinking about this. This is the right time where the skills and the knowledge meet?
I think if you're really lucky, it's just there in the background. Joe got his pocket money. He used to do some jobs for that, and then he could earn more money if he wanted. But it was then his money to do what he wanted with, and we've encouraged him to save, and that was just part of family life. It wasn't a very specific sort of, right, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this now. So it was just there in the background. So maybe not make it needs to be there, but it needs to not be made a big deal of either, like it's some big scary thing, because it isn't, or it doesn't have to be.
Okay, great. Right, over to you. Questions from the floor. Just wave at me and I'll get a mic to you. So there was one right at the back. Rich, you're going to have to run up there. We didn't strategically place the questions to be near the front, so I'll just wait for Rich to walk up there. And if you can just wait until you've got the mic in front of you so everybody can hear you, that would be great.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I normally try and do this without a mic, which doesn't help. I'm really interested in the data, and I think want to just try and put a different spin on it, because one of the, obviously it's going to go to the one on gender disparity, but if you look at what a big issue is around investing and what some of the outputs is from research around the difference between men and women in terms of investing, overconfidence is a huge issue. So it's interesting that they came out and saying that actually their confidence levels in investing is not that great. But if you compare performance of male and female investors, actually that lack of overconfidence means they outperform because they don't fiddle with their investments as much. So that's one point to factor in. And the most important point I think we should make from this is also linked to the Consumer Duty paper, because communication is going to be placed on us. Responsibility of how we communicate as an industry is going to be placed on us. And language, particularly on fund fact sheets or anything to do with investments, is overly masculine. So I think that's a huge problem, and something as an industry we need to remember. Responsibility is coming back to us. We need to communicate to clients better, and I think a lot of this data is showing it to younger people, female investors, everyone that's not typical. And I think that's something that we really should take away from this.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I can't add to that at all.
No.
Thanks for sharing that.
Great. You're so eloquent, you stunned them into silence. Great. Any other questions? I don't think so. Okay, right. In that case, then there'll be plenty of time to ask your questions in our next session. But for now, please thank Steve and Kate.